did they call you?
I don't know.
Remember.
They said freak.
Freak.
Look at the freak.
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and murderous twins. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Sisters. This 1972 psychological horror follows a young journalist named Grace who witnesses her neighbor commit a murder, only to be met with skepticism from the police and denial from the accused woman. She discovers some bizarre secrets around Danielle and her strange husband, and her search for the truth has her seeing double. Sisters was written and directed by Brian De Palma, who has brought us a variety of films including Phantom of the Paradise, Carrie, Dressed to Kill, Scarface, and Carlito's Way. He's done a bit of everything, but he's most well known for his thrillers, crime dramas, and psychological horror. He is included in the new Hollywood movement with directors like Spielberg, Scorsese, Carpenter, and Lucas. His influence within this genre as well as all others is undeniable, and Sisters is the first film where he really embraces his love for horror movies. The film stars Margot Kidder from Black Christmas and the Amityville Horror as Danielle Breton, Jennifer Salt from Hi Mom and Brewster McCloud as Grace Collier, William Finley from Eaten Alive and The Funhouse as Emile Breton, Charles Durning from Tootsie and Dick Tracy as Joseph Larch, and Lyle Wilson from Just Between Friends and The Incredible Melting Man as Philip Wood. De Palma is definitely one of those directors that likes to work with the same actors and actresses again and again, so they are familiar faces within his filmography. Shooting took place in New York, primarily in Staten Island, with De Palma sometimes spending hours getting the lighting and camera angles just the way he wanted them to. He also utilized his experimental roots to create some really great POV shots, split screens, and long tracking shots that are still influential to this day. Cinematography was handled by Gregory Sandor, who has worked on Jump and The Born Losers. The score was composed by Bernard Herrmann, who has scored films like Taxi Driver, Citizen Kane, and Freaking Psycho. For those who don't know, De Palma loves Hitchcock, and it really shows in Sisters. The film had a pretty small theatrical release, but it did manage to double its $500,000 budget, and it was met with pretty positive reviews from critics. Thank you so much to my patron Jason for requesting Sisters for me to review. I had vaguely known of it since I covered Black Christmas, but it was a film that really wasn't on my radar until now. I've been avoiding it up to this point, but there is kind of a big twist in Sisters. I'm obviously going to spoil it in the breakdown, so if you want to watch Sisters for yourself first, this might be a good time to hop off. Speaking of, it's probably time we jump in as well. You may want to close your blinds for this one, folks, because we're watching Sisters. The movie opens with these fascinating yet terrifying images of a fetus, and holy shit, this score is excessively Hitchcockian. Are these real? I wouldn't be surprised either way. We jump to this guy in a locker room who happens to be joined by a blind woman who must think it's the woman's changing room. He contemplates whether or not to speak up as the woman undresses, and it's revealed this is a weird-ass game show where the players have to guess what the man will do in this situation. The not-so-blind woman is a model named Danielle who works on the show, and both of the contestants guess he will stick around for the whole peep show. He ultimately exits before too much is revealed, so the contestants don't win any money, I guess. Very interesting premise. Danielle and the peeping Tom, whose real name is Phil, are brought out to greet the audience. Danielle wins a cutlery set, and Phil gets a free dinner for two at a restaurant called the African Room, and the old people love that shit. Danielle asks the mildly chivalrous stranger if she can join him on his dinner for two, and we join them near the end of their date. Danielle explains she is French-Canadian but considers New York her home, and she loves how she can disappear in such a big city. They are interrupted by Danielle's ex-husband Emile, and he demands she come home with him. He was actually in the audience of the show, so he's been following her for most of the day. He is dragged away by the waiters, and Phil offers to drive her home. As they ride the Staten Island ferry, she tells Phil she feels very little for most people, which has been the case ever since her sister left. He cheers Danielle up with a smooch though. They arrive at the questionably drunk woman's apartment and start getting handsy, and Danielle strips down as she goes to lower the thermostat. As Phil is shutting the blinds, he notices a neighbor, as well as creepy-ass Emil standing outside. In a ploy to get him to leave, he decides to drive away, but just go around the block and come through the back. The plan works as Emil immediately leaves after Phil, and when he returns, the two start going at it. Phil doesn't notice the giant scar on Danielle's hip, and sometime later she wakes up on the couch. She downs a couple mysterious red pills, of which she only has 2 left, and she hears someone calling to her. She argues with someone named Dominique, who is very upset that she was left all alone while she had coitus in their living room. Danielle commands Dominique to stay in her room and warns her that she will ruin their birthday. Phil unknowingly knocks the last 2 pills down the drain, and Danielle enters crying. She tells Phil that was her sister, and she gets ridiculously jealous when she spends time with anyone else. They are twins, and she is in town to celebrate their birthday together, but she insists that Phil stay and join the festivities. He agrees, and also agrees to pick up more pills from the drugstore for her, and he makes a detour at a bakery to buy her a birthday cake. Danielle calls Emil to tell him she only has 2 pills left, and he says he will be there shortly. Danielle begins writhing in pain as a happy birthday message is written on the cake, and Emil watches as Phil returns. He makes it back to Danielle's apartment to find her asleep on the sofa bed, and he uses her new cutlery set to open up the cake. I wasn't sure about Phil at first, but this guy is literally such a sweetheart. Emil finally makes his way inside, but when Phil approaches Danielle, she grabs the knife and stabs him in the dick and face. She spazzes out as he tries to flee, but she ultimately grabs the knife and butchers him off screen. Poor Phil is somehow not dead yet and still trying to crawl away, and we switch to a patented De Palma split screen as he tries to get the neighbor's attention. She actually notices him writing the word help in blood and calls the police, and we see Danielle is just now waking up in the bathroom. The woman named Grace reports what she believes to be a murder, and we learn through her articles that she is a journalist who doesn't have much faith in the thin blue line. The officer on the phone knows of Grace and her articles and starts badgering her, and Danielle slowly makes her way to answer the door. She tells Emil she is feeling much better. That is until he points out the carcass in her living room. He is shocked to learn that Dominique has returned, and he has Danielle assist him in hiding Phil's body within the sofa. Detectives Kelly and Spinetti arrive to meet Grace as Emil starts cleaning, and they are very unconcerned with the idea of a black man dying from stab wounds. Danielle gets gussied up as Grace and the detectives bicker about police brutality and racism, but Kelly decides he'd better check out the room before she writes an article about them. Emil exits with the evidence and narrowly avoids them, and Danielle answers the door. She tries to delay their entrance with getting dressed and asking about a search warrant, but eventually decides to let them in. They confront her about the potential murder, which Danielle obviously denies, but Grace reiterates that she watched a twitchy, dark-haired woman stab a man to death. Danielle insists that she lives alone and had no guests last night, and she tells Grace that since her divorce, she has also gotten jumpy from time to time in her solitude. She allows the police to have a look around, but Grace pretends to use the bathroom in order to scope out the living room by herself. Spinetti has her rejoin the group, and Emil hides the evidence in his car. Grace notices all of Danielle's clothes are in sets of 2, but she argues that it's custom to have multiple sets for modeling. Emil arrives and greets the officers, and Grace finds the birthday cake in the fridge and tries to confront her about the Dominique and Danielle message, but she slips and drops the cake. Detective Kelly tells her to leave him and Danielle alone, and Grace's mother arrives for a lunch they had scheduled. She nags her daughter about her dating life, but also starts complaining about an experimental asylum that has opened up in her neighborhood. I wonder if it could come into play. The patients live in a mostly regular home with each other and even have the ability to come and go, and the whole thing makes Mama Collier nervous. Grace has her mom stop at the bakery that the cake came from, and she confirms with the employees that a black man bought a cake for a Dominique and Danielle. She gets their names and rushes out, and she yells at her mother for belittling her work. She's tired of the crappy stories she's typically given and wants to cover things like police corruption and political racketeering. Her mother decides to push their date to another time, and Grace reaches out to a newspaper to hopefully print her story when it's finished. She receives the contact info for a private investigator named Joseph Larch, and they quickly start staking out the apartment. He has her go home and call Danielle's phone to see if she is home, and once he knows the coast is clear, he enters the apartment. He eventually finds something he's very excited about, but Grace spots a group of people coming inside. She rings Danielle's line once as a warning signal to Larch, and as Emil supervises the disposal of the murder couch, he makes his escape. He isn't sure what is in the folder he found hidden away, but he is certain the body is inside the couch as it was too heavy for him to move. Grace reveals he unknowingly discovered the murderess as well, as what he found was a medical file on the Blanchin twins. Apparently they were world-famous conjoined twins, but right now Larch plans on following the couch to Quebec to see who plans on picking it up. Grace meets with a writer named Arthur McLennan as he wrote about the twins in Life magazine the previous year. He's surprised to see their official medical file, and he's happy to provide Grace with as much information as he can recall. He shows her a video explaining the history of conjoined twins, and it discusses how modern surgical advances have allowed some twins to safely be separated. This tape is specifically about the Blanchians though, and we learn they were the first conjoined twins born in Canada. Their parents died in a car accident while they were infants, and they spent their childhoods within the Loisel Institute. Doctors were hesitant to separate them because their spinal cords were attached, but as time went on, their mental health began deteriorating. Danielle was usually very sweet and responsive, while Dominique became irrational and violent, and doctors decided it was worth the risk to separate them. McLennan was never able to follow up with the hospital, but he did learn there were some kind of complications during the surgery. He paid off a nurse to learn that Dominique actually died on the operating table. Night falls, and Larch is still following the moving van to Quebec, and Grace begins a trail of her own as she follows Danielle and Emil that night. They lead her to a humongous house and they head inside. Grace quickly follows and watches as Emil sedates Danielle, and she is greeted by a hedge trimmer who lives here. He allows her to use his telephone, but she is interrupted by a woman who is deathly afraid of germs passing through the telephone. If you haven't guessed it already, this is the new asylum Grace's mother was talking about. A staff member confronts Grace about her unwelcome entrance into the hospital, and he's disappointed to hear the rumors about his patients have spread all the way to murder now. The nurse calls the director of the clinic and he agrees to meet with Grace. Oh shit, Emil is the fucking director, and he tells the nurse that Grace, whose real name is Margaret, is a new patient here. Damn, he got you good, Grace. The nurse doesn't believe her story cause it sounds pretty crazy, and they sedate her and lock her in a room. She awakens under some kind of hypnotherapy, and Emil has her repeat that there was no body and no murder, and this whole thing was a ridiculous mistake. He tells her she arrived here to exploit the sorrows of the patients, but they are willing to share some of their secrets with her. He reveals she is laid next to Danielle and has her feel the surgery scar, and she enters a memory from the Loisel Institute. She sees herself as Dominique, and Emil reminds Danielle of the ridicule she faced while still attached to her sister. More memories show that Emil groomed Danielle into forming a relationship with him, and caused her to resent her sister and wish they could be separated. And I guess nobody at that fucking hospital had an issue with it. Danielle got pregnant with Emil's baby and tried to explain that to Dominique, but her sister was enraged and tried to stab her belly with some garden shears. The baby died during childbirth, and Danielle began bleeding internally, and the only way to save her was to separate her from Dominique. Grace watches as a cleaver is slowly passed to Emil, and as he swings it down, she awakens in a panic. Danielle wakes up as well, calling for Dominique, and she disagrees when Emil reminds her she is dead. He commands her back to sleep and says he is going to marry her, and one day she will accept her sister's death. He explains to Grace that Danielle began taking on Dominique's identity to reassure that she was once real, and it specifically happened whenever he and Danielle had a sexual encounter. He tried to get rid of this new personality with pills, sedation, and other techniques, but nothing seems to stop Dominique from returning. Now every man Danielle has sex with is Emile in Dominique's eyes, which is why they end up murdered. He kisses Danielle to awaken Dominique, and he forces her to accept responsibility for Phil's murder. But as she explains to Emile exactly what she did to Phil, she also stabs him in the dick. He grabs her and pins her down, but Emile eventually bleeds out and dies right on top of her. Danielle returns and sobs for her dead lover, and Grace awakens very confused and very scared. Detective Kelly and some paramedics arrive, and while Danielle claims to be innocent, he has her arrested for the murder. Grace's parents take the traumatized woman home, but now whenever Kelly asks about Phil's murder, all she can say are the lines Emile ingrained into her mind. The film ends with Larch on top of a telephone pole, just waiting for somebody who is never going to show up to pick up that damn couch. And that's Sisters. This was a weird one. While the story is definitely complex and provides its own satisfying ending, it really is a film that you take in with your senses. The viewer is constantly being tested with the music, sound design, and visuals. I've never seen De Palma's early satirical work, so I may be mistaken, but it's my understanding that this is the first feature film where he used the split screen that he's now so well known for. Dressed to Kill and Carrie are definitely more widely known films that use the effect, but I'd argue the use of the split screen is tied in with the themes and plot of Sisters much more thoughtfully. I love the moment where two shots merge into one. That's not easy to accomplish. I also love how bizarre the cinematography gets in the final act. There is clearly a lot of homage to Hitchcock in the film, but I think the third act really transforms into its own new thing. This film clearly had an influence on directors like Lynch and Cronenberg, and I'm surprised I don't hear it brought up more often. The film is all about voyeurism, and it visually explores the subject in so many ways. We see reality and dreams through multiple perspectives, whether through film or someone's eyes. The entire opening scene with a bizarre Peeping Tom game show really hits the nail on the head when it comes to the movie's purpose. The film explores how the information we learn, even the information we see with our own eyes, can be tampered with to mislead us. The character of Grace is really interesting to me. She is so open about her disdain for corruption and does not mince her words when she believes she is right. Her discussions about police brutality and racism are sadly just as topical today as they were in the 1970s. I just know that if this movie was released today, hordes of angry white dudes would come out of the woodworks to call it woke trash. Horror has always and will always be the genre that pushes the boundary of what subjects can be discussed in film. It's not always pretty, it doesn't always age well, but it's something I love about this genre. It does have a fairly slow pace, and I do think the middle portion of the film isn't as interesting as the beginning or the end, but that's my only small complaint about it. Obviously, based on the title, poster, and opening credits, I knew immediately there would be a twin aspect, but I was truly guessing the whole film whether or not Dominique was truly there or not. And despite having somewhat of an exploitation film kind of premise, I think Sisters integrates mental illness and deformity into the script with a lot more sophistication and sympathy than a lot of other films in the 70s and 80s, and even now. Danielle and Dominique are not the monsters of this film. That distinction goes directly to Emile. His abuse of those girls is what started all of this, and it was great to see him get what he deserved by the end. Overall though, Sisters is a very unique film that blends De Palma's love for Hitchcockian homage, immersive documentary, and avant-garde experimentation. It is not his most polished work, but I do think it's a film that any De Palma and general horror fans should watch at least once. It's got great performances, relevant political commentary, and striking visuals that will really engross you into this world. Thank you again to my patron Jason for requesting Sisters for me to review. I genuinely really enjoyed this one. Well, that's about it. Sisters did receive a remake in 2006, but I'm not going to check it out anytime soon. But do join me in 2 weeks as I wrap up the Lecter franchise with Hannibal Rising. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Sisters. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support this channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks, y'all.